Hello, everyone. Welcome as we gather together online again for another iteration of A+D Thursdays. It's always a privilege to welcome our community of students and interested parties, whether curators, critics, or community members from the region and abroad. My name is Shannon Jackson. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor for Arts and Design and also Hadidi Professor here in the Arts and Humanities at UC Berkeley. If you don't know by now, you are now part of a public lecture series that is embedded in a larger course taught and conceived by me in my office that exposes students to a range of art fields across literature, design, visual art, performance, cinema, and more. Together, we have been exploring the field of time-based media art this semester and opening to the public every Thursday with distinguished speakers. We're focused on time-based media art, thanks in particular to a generous donation from the Cramlick Art Foundation, whose vision and commitment to education and research in the field of time-based art is inspiring and something that for which we are perpetually grateful here at UC Berkeley. Also, at this time, I have been throughout the semester making sure that we acknowledge the fraught and complicated politics of the land on which we gather, even if we do so virtually today. And throughout the semester, we have been acknowledging the fact that UC Berkeley is sited on the ancestral and unceded land of the Ohlone tribe, and recognizing that the Ohlone people and their vision of the past, present, and future of this land is part and parcel of how UC Berkeley needs to and is increasingly reimagining its own relationship. Throughout the semester, in fact, buildings on our campus, as well as other sites, have been undergoing a process of renaming, and there have been a range of practices that recognize our allegiance with an Indigenous rights platform, and has been part of our institutional culture to make an acknowledgement, such as the one that I did just now. And in doing so, we're doing so in league with a series on Thursdays that is focused on time-based media art practice and its aesthetics and politics, including its aesthetics and politics of place. And I'll make a plug now for the fact that we also host, if you don't know, a regular Monday evening series, A+D Mondays, that is also focused on the aesthetics and politics of place, but with a slightly different theme, thinking in particular about health, about urban planning, and about space and its reimagining around issues of human rights and racial equity all throughout the semester. And we have, I think, 3 to 4 more blockbuster events ahead. So tune in on Mondays as well. Throughout our series on Thursdays, we've welcomed an incredible array of artists and curators: William Kentridge, Steve McQueen, Chrissy Isles, Catherine Wood, Isaac Julian, and many more. And today I have the distinct pleasure of getting to introduce Brett Snyder, my colleague at UC Davis. Brett is an associate professor at UC Davis and a professor of design, also a partner in the Oakland-based practice Cheng+Snyder, where he and his partner work at a range of scales across physical and digital platforms. His research and design practice is located, in fact, at the intersection between architecture and graphics, with a focus on developing connections between people and the environment. Having Brett in our series is particularly is a treasure for me in many ways. He is my fellow UC system colleague at Davis, and he, like my other UC system colleagues at UC Santa Cruz, Mark Nash and Isaac Julian, have been focused, we've all been focused together right now on teaching in the field of time-based media art. You've experienced the larger lecture course that I'm running. Over in Davis, Brett Snyder has been leading a course on exhibition design in new media art, thinking about its aesthetics and its logistics in setting up an experience, an immersive experience. So students have already got to meet Brett and hear a bit about his practice, and we're going to get to hear more today, more about the various ways that Brett creates in every project he does, not only in time-based media art exhibition, creates context for immersive, critical, political, and relational experiences, really, truly in every design project he undertakes. And we're going to get to hear more about that wide-ranging practice today. So without further ado, I'll turn that screen over to you, Brett. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Shannon. I'm so happy to be here, and it was really a pleasure to work with in small groups in a kind of workshop setting with the students in the class on Tuesday. So that was really, some of the things that students said are still ringing with me, and I'm also just incredibly honored to be in this series with with these amazing superstars. So with that, I am going to share my screen. So just to give a kind of quick background, and this first slide really just shows a kind of overview of the kinds of projects that I work on. So my background is in both graphics and architecture. And I will say that having that kind of overlap of these two disciplines has really led me to just be thinking about how we can think about our relationship to the environment at many scales and through these range of projects. So I'm going to actually, in a very just kind of straightforward manner, I'm going to go through a series of projects, really starting with some of the earliest projects that I think for me actually set ways that I have been thinking about design over the past decade or so. So this first project that I'm going to show is called Museum of the Phantom City. And I developed this project with my partner, who's an architectural historian. And really the idea behind this project stemmed, we began this project in 2008. And really it just stemmed from the idea of, as architects, are there different ways that we might understand and think about the way that we relate to the city and urban places? And we were able to do this project with the support of the Van Allen Institute in New York. And we really just started to think about, things like building plaques and ways that we kind of are encountered with the history of places in the city. And we developed this project thinking about visionary but unbuilt places. And so we launched this iPhone application in 2009. It really was at this time when there were really only a kind of small range of kinds of apps on the iPhone store. It was really just as the iPhone was beginning to take off. And what was interesting to us about this was thinking about especially New York is a place where so many architects have really thought about, kind of visionary utopian proposals, things that, such as in the bottom right here, you see this proposal by Super Studio for this, what was known as the continuous monument. There's also the image, the kind of dome over New York that you see, which was a proposal by Buckminster Fuller. And I think just this question of, now that we, have this kind of ubiquitous device with us when we're, moving throughout the city, are there ways that we can actually begin to almost think of the museum as, the city as a museum itself, where we could actually begin to have these, see the difference between what is and what could be. And it was really interesting for us as architects to be able to see how people responded to this app. One of the kind of responses that we got was that people wanted to be able to access the sites from anywhere. And so actually we also, had a website where folks could kind of see and, get information about the sites. We also really just thought about this app as an experience. So we wanted to, and in some ways, I think, this was actually many years before Pokemon Go, but I think, Pokemon Go that probably many folks in this talk today are familiar with, this idea of actually creating a kind of odd disjunction between, you know, what you see in this game and just everyday life. And so, you know, obviously this was at the beginning of the iPhone, when augmented reality was not necessarily a kind of, you know, integrated into software at the time. But we still, even in the kind of way, the interface of this, wanted to think about how could we create this kind of odd juncture between what is and what could be. So this was just an image from the launch. So we actually did it as a kind of scavenger hunt. And then we've also collaborated with other folks, such as launching the project in Chicago not so many years ago. Another project that I'm going to show, and really, I would just say that these series of projects are very much about different ways that we can engage with place. And so this other project is in Syracuse, New York. The project is called Salt City. And the idea of this project was to somehow create a mural that would connect the kind of contemporary city with the past city. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with Syracuse, New York, it really was a kind of a bustling city that really had a kind of strong industry towards the beginning of the last century. But it's also a city that earlier really, you know, was connected to much of the country through the Erie Canal. However, over the past couple of decades, as industry kind of moved out of cities like Syracuse, New York, it was what was known as a kind of shrinking city. And so when I came to Syracuse, one of the things that I just observed was all of these kind of, you know, former industrial buildings that, you know, were not being used or not necessarily being kind of upkept. And really, I just started to identify these as, you know, what I call dead walls, and thinking about, you know, what are ways that we can kind of use these walls to start to create connections in the city. And so working with a group of students at Syracuse, we actually reached out to many arts organizations in the city and said, you know, somehow, you know, would you like to, you know, be connected to this mural? And so what we were able to do was develop a mural where from a distance, it was a kind of historical image of Syracuse, but from close up, it actually, every QR code on this mural was a link to a contemporary arts organization in the city. And for me, what was interesting about this was every arts organization that we reached out to was completely excited, you know, to be included in this mural, so that it just created this kind of, you know, kind of current conversation. And, you know, just developing ways that we could actually fabricate the mural so that you can see this image here where we made it, we actually had to do a kind of multi-step process where we would put vinyl on the wall, we would paint over the vinyl, and then remove the vinyl. And that was actually able to be captured by a phone, so that the phone would link the QR code and be able to go to the arts organization. And then just a kind of a zoomed out shot of that, and then a zoomed out image of the impression. I do also just want to add that finding the right image for this project was a real challenge, to find something that would actually you know, have this kind of detail of the QR code when you're close up, but would actually read as a kind of image of historical Syracuse from far away. And I was just really thankful to the Erie Canal Museum for letting me spend days in their archive going through pretty much every photograph of the Erie Canal that they had. I think we actually did look at every single one. And then I would also just add that, you know, this piece, like many of the works that I've been involved in, had both a front end and a back end, meaning that there was the kind of analog mural, but there was also this kind of online portion of this project that people could access. And actually, I will say that, you know, I think this project I did almost a decade ago at this point, about 9 years ago. And I still actually see every day on my phone people kind of linking to the using the QR codes. And then just a distance photograph in the city. Another project that I'm going to highlight, and I really want to mention with this project that it was a collaboration with my colleague, a landscape architect at UC Davis, Claire Napowan. And this project was kind of an interesting project, which is something that folks might have heard of, which is called fog waste. And so FOG stands for fat, oil, and grease. And something, I think folks are often aware of is that we, just the kind of knowledge that it's not a good idea to put things like fat, oil, and grease in your drain. And what was interesting about this project was that San Jose, rather than approach this issue of fog waste by coming up with a kind of engineering solution, they actually reached out to artists and designers with what's referred to as an RFQ, meaning a request for qualifications. And they were reaching out to artists and designers to somehow address this issue of fat, oil, and grease in the city sewer system. And I will say that this is actually a problem that many cities have. And you may notice as you're walking or driving around, sometimes you'll see sanitation trucks with a kind of tube connected to a manhole cover. And what they're actually doing is they're doing kind of sewer cleaning, where they're actually kind of running water through the sewer pipes at a kind of very high speed. And so we worked with the city to develop some way of actually addressing this larger issue. And actually this slide just shows some of the interventions that we worked both with the city, but also really with community members to develop a kind of suite of strategies that would start to address this issue. And if you look at the issue and just imagine it from the perspective of the city, there are thousands and thousands of feet of sanitary sewer in most cities. And what you see here, this is just a map of the sanitary sewer system in San Jose. And as our kind of process, we really just wanted to meet and talk with all of the people involved with this issue. So what you see here is us just doing a ride along with a sanitary sewer worker. In the right-hand image, you see us meeting with a mother's group at a local high school in San Jose. The lower left image, you see an image of us with the at the sanitary sewer treatment center. And then on the lower right, you see what I referred to earlier as one of these kind of regularly scheduled cleanings of the sanitary sewer system. One of the big things I'll say that I really learned from this project was just the importance in doing community engaged design work of meeting with communities where they are. And I would say that this is a really big thing because I have worked on other projects doing community engaged design where you might, want to do a kind of meeting around a specific issue, but, you could begin to imagine that if I were, hosting holding an event for, community members to come and learn about fat, oil, and grease, you probably would not get a whole lot of folks coming to that meeting. And so really the idea of meeting people where they are, and I think this is something we've heard a lot about from other folks that do community engaged design work, but just the importance of, hearing from the people who, each one of these people has a kind of expertise, whether it's the driver who kind of understands and kind of sees every day, people's impression and hearing about, what happens when there's a problem, but also hearing from, this mothers group around, what are the issues that are kind of most important to them. And some of these might be connected to fog waste, but some of them might actually not be have a really strong connection to fog waste. And so one of the things we also just realized was important in developing this project was even just coming up with a kind of way of kind of explaining our connection to the sanitary sewer system. And so what you see here is just an image that actually shows what happens when our water leaves our house. It starts at our sink. If you might notice if you live in a place like me in the kind of Berkeley area, that in front of your house you might have what's referred to as a clean out, which is that kind of small hole that goes down that actually connects to your sanitary sewer lines as they leave your house. In the street, this connects to a main line. Ultimately, this goes to a water treatment plant where the waste is kind of taken out of the water. And then finally, the water actually goes into the bay. I think many of you have probably seen these signs around the street for the water in the street, where you see it kind of drains to the bay sign. So ultimately, all of that water also goes to the same place. So again, just highlighting some of the different interventions that we designed. And really, these were made all to kind of work cohesively as a system. So people would see these green painted manholes, and it would just create a kind of curiosity. And then everywhere where we did the kind of green manholes in the street, we made sure that in those areas there were these kind of informational pamphlets that were being handed out to folks. And then as well, all of the trucks in the San Jose system had these kind of graphics that actually explained the project to people, so that when you're walking or driving around, you would have a little bit of information to kind of understand that these folks are out there and actually like really working hard to keep the sanitary sewer lines clean. Another project, and actually this is also a project that I've worked on with my landscape architect colleague, Claire Napawan, in some ways also touches on this idea of meeting people where they are. And I think many of us, especially during the pandemic, are often online, whether, whatever social media platforms we might be on. And this project really kind of stemmed from this idea of kind of using social media as a place to have a conversation around climate change. And so through a series of workshops, actually all over both the state of California, as well as some workshops that we've done internationally, we would ask people to look through their social media feed and kind of look for images that they might be able to find some connection to climate change in that image. And actually on this poster, what you're seeing are a series of images that just connect to the issue of the drought. And this was really important to us because I think one of the ways that we often think about climate change is that we often have these kind of iconic images in our head, whether it's polar bears or melting glaciers. But this project really asked people to think about, like, in what ways do we actually see climate change in our everyday life? And an image like this, where we can actually, if you begin to kind of think about this image in different ways, there's actually ways that you can begin to identify certain things in the image that might relate to climate change, whether it's, in an image like this, where there's obviously a lot of concrete and asphalt, and you might begin to get what's known as a heat island effect. You might also, notice the different kinds of, trees and shrubbery in the image, as well as the kind of predominance of the automobile. And so from this project, we also developed a website, and what you see are these kind of pink dots, and every one of these pink dots was based on a kind of social media post where someone was identifying an image that related to climate change using the hashtag #OurChangingClimate. And again, you see just some of these images and the questions that these raised, and really just asking folks to look a little bit closer at some of the images. And often these are images that people had in their feed already, but actually just kind of more deeply reading those images and beginning to make a connection between that image that they had taken and climate change. So another project that I'm going to show, and actually this is quite a recent project that we worked with the landscape architecture firm Scape out of New York. And this was part of the Resilient by Design effort in the Bay Area. And I was part of a team, and the team is listed right here on the left, all of the folks that were on this team, called Public Sediment. And the idea of this whole Resilient by Design challenge was to think about the kind of next climate disaster before it happens. And what you see on this image is there were it's either 10 or 11 teams that were part of this effort. And you can see that each of these teams was actually connected to a specific location or region in the greater Bay Area, and to think about how can we think about building resilience in this specific area. And you can see I circled our team in yellow, Public Sediment, and we were focused on Alameda Creek. And each of these different teams was focused on issues that were really specific to the site that they were matched with. And for those of you in the greater Bay Area, just to kind of highlight where our site is. So our site is right here, Alameda Creek, and it borders Fremont, Newark, and Hayward. And Alameda Creek itself actually starts around here and kind of empties into the bay around here. And if anyone has ever been driving down 80 between the Bay Area and San Jose, this is actually the way that you'll experience Alameda Creek. It it barely looks like a creek. It essentially feels almost like a kind of field with kind of rocks and bush. I think you can actually see 80 right here passing over the creek. And the kind of vision of the team was that one of the ways that a creek actually functions historically is that a creek actually delivers sediment from the highlands to the lowlands, and actually that sediment provides kind of breeding ground for a whole range of species. And as part of this effort, I also worked with students to begin to think about, how we might think about the way some of these creeks actually function. And actually, this is an image taken with a group of students that were also working on the project and really thinking about just this issue of sediment reaching the bay and being able to see it from that kind of level. And then just highlighting some of these student projects that were actually kind of in parallel to the design team's work. And, similar to some of the other projects, with Public Sediment, we were actually able to do a series of events working with the public. This was what we called a creek crawl, and we developed a series of tools that allowed folks to really think about in what ways do they kind of value or connect to their own relationship to the creek. We also developed what we call the Alameda Creek Atlas, which had kind of two parts. There was one part that built on the kind of team's knowledge around the creek. And actually you can see here, again, when we think about sediment, actually sediment kind of takes many forms, and you can kind of see some of those images of sediment right here on the left. So again, this kind of atlas had kind of two main components. One component was this kind of information that we developed as a kind of knowledge to our team. But equally importantly, we developed an atlas that was really meant to kind of solicit impressions, feelings, local knowledge, ways in which people kind of understood the creek over the years. And it was kind of amazing to us to hear all of the kind of amazing stories that folks were able to share around their own kind of understanding or knowledge, or ways in which folks who've lived by the creek for 10 years and hear like this example about the red-legged frogs that live near the creek. And actually, this shows a series of these design a range of kinds of both workshops and events, and you can see different tours. Each one of these actually represents a kind of different moment that we had a range of kinds of ways of meeting with community members. And again, kind of highlighting what I was saying before with the San Jose project, each one of these events really was an attempt to meet people where they are, and to, sometimes we would have a kind of evening event, but other times we would actually go to, places like a senior home, and would, again, kind of meet people where they are, or a farmer's market, and again, just a kind of range of events, so that we weren't just holding something that felt like people having to kind of come to our court. These were also some of these events that we did, both with local camps, as well as we also worked with some local school groups in the area. Actually, this shows us at an Earth Day event, and for these events, we also developed a range of ways of kind of interacting with different folks, and also folks of different ages, to get to their understanding of the creek. And actually, this was one of the tools that we developed, which was a kind of interactive map model. And what you see here are people just showing their the route that they take in relationship to the creek. And you can actually see the creek kind of weave through this line right here. Is actually the line of the creek. One of the things you actually notice when you see this model is that we have the kind of highlands right here, and we have the lowlands right here. And what's interesting is that in the highlands, you can see there's actually not a whole lot of ways to kind of traverse the highlands, whereas the lowlands are where folks live and work and play. And so each rubber band you see here is someone just showing, where they live, where they work, where they go every day. And again, the kind of interesting thing here is that folks are actually moving around in what really historically would have been the floodplain. And then again, at these range of events, we got all kinds of different, narratives and stories about the creek. And just to highlight, again, kind of similar to the kind of almost generic image of Alameda Creek that you get from the 80. What's the Alameda Creek? We don't know what that is. We've never been there. And again, this kind of irony that I think actually folks sometimes don't even realize that they're crossing the creek, because it just, in many places, just feels like a kind of open field. But other folks who actually, remember or have kind of memories of the creek. So this one in the upper right, I think if we could fish in the creek again, that would encourage stewardship. Sounds backwards to think of saving the fish just to eat it, but it really would work. And I think this was, just these kinds of amazing observations that we got from people that again, just bring up this question of like, how do you kind of value this thing? And one of the kind of impressions I got from a student at the time was just, in some ways, this idea of like, that over the years in the kind of mid parts of the last century, often engineering projects were kind of singularly focused. And then, for Alameda Creek, that focus was to prevent flooding. But I think now, actually, in the kind of current decade, we're really thinking about, are there ways that we can almost unengineer and kind of wild some of these places that would maybe not just singularly focus on flooding, but actually thinking about all the ways in which our some of this environmental infrastructure functions. And then just a kind of last image of some of the various visions. And I will say, our team was incredibly successful in actually getting a whole lot of funding for the site to have some of these improvements that have been kind of funded recently. So this next project I'm I'm going to show is actually a current project that I'm working on right now, which is called, which is actually also in the UC system at Kresge College. And this is a project that we're working with the architecture firm Studio Gang in Chicago. So for those of you that may or may not be familiar with Kresge College at UC Santa Cruz. So Kresge College was designed by the firm MLTW, which was headed by Charles Moore. And this actually was, became, even though it's, not so old from the 70s, these buildings were actually designed on a really tight and difficult budget. And so in recent years, it's become very clear that they've needed to renovate and of course also expand, a kind of big need for student housing on campuses like UC Santa Cruz. So there was also an important piece of these projects that you can see in this particular image, that one of the things that was integrated into this project was the use of super graphics. And actually these super graphics were designed by someone who has been an educator at UC Berkeley for a long time, Mark Tribe, in the architecture department. And the firm MLTW, I think folks that may be here are probably very familiar with some of the other work that they've done. Sea Ranch here, an earlier project where they worked with the artist and designer Barbara Stofficher Solomon, who was involved in the super graphics for that particular project. And this actually shows an image, a kind of rendering of the project from recently, and again, kind of situating both some of the historical, so renovating some of the historical buildings, but also bringing in new architecture to the project. And this is a rendering from the Studio Gang architects. And so our kind of involvement in the project was kind of twofold. One, thinking about, as community engaged designers, how can we really learn from the occupants, their understanding, ways in which folks kind of understand the site, ways in which they're able to kind of move around and understand it from a wayfinding standpoint. And so working as the environmental graphic designers on this project, we wanted to think about, on the one hand, how do we build off of some of these really important super graphics from the original design, but then also kind of reorient and think about the new architecture of the site and how that might be help orient visitors and occupants to understand the site in a kind of holistic way. And so again, kind of working with the architects, we developed a environmental graphic and signage system that really thought about, almost from a kind of curatorial standpoint, how folks might understand both the kind of history as well as the ecology of the site. And so what you see here, just a kind of overview that shows both the existing buildings. So we're looking at the kind of historical buildings along this corridor, as well as three new buildings, the new residence halls right here, a new building at the kind of northern tip of the site, and then a new town hall. And what you see here are actually three kind of themes. And one of the things that really helped situate all of our work from a environmental graphic standpoint was that all of the kind of graphics of this project were really integrated into the architecture. So what you see here are actually three different kinds of etched glass. An etched glass that would be used at the residential buildings, an etched glass that would be used at the academic center, and then another type of etched glass that would be used at the town hall. And one of the things about the etched glass is that not only would it help give each of these buildings a kind of character that either relates to the ecology or the kind of historical graphics at the site, but this also is kind of bird safe etching that keeps birds from crashing into the glass. And so we used a kind of, and worked with folks at UC Santa Cruz, thinking about a kind of field guide of how folks could kind of understand all of these amazing kind of species that are native to the site. And for anyone who's ever been to UC Santa Cruz, it's just this incredibly unique coastal redwood forest that you're living in if you're living in one of these residence halls. So beginning to kind of understand all of the kind of species that are kind of local and native to this particular site. And so here you have an image of the etched glass, and from, in some ways similar to the mural that I showed at the beginning, that from a distance you actually barely even perceive anything, and then close up you're actually able to perceive a kind of etching that's all of these unique species on the site. As well, we've been developing an augmented reality component of this, where you're able to get more information about these different species on the site, such as here with the great horned owl. As well as components on the site that allow visitors to understand both the kind of new architecture as well as the historical architecture on the site. And this is just looking at a ground etched plan. And also integrating augmented reality components into that kind of understanding of the historical and contemporary architecture. And then just a last project that I'm going to show is actually part of something I'm involved in that's part of Imagining America, which is a kind of organization. It's a cohort of schools across the country that are really interested in particularly around engaged design. And so I'm a co-chair of this initiative for the Collective of Publicly Engaged Designers. And one of the efforts that we did during the pandemic is to ask a bunch of folks who are really involved in publicly engaged design to contribute ideas around what does it mean to be engaged in place during this particular time of the pandemic. And so we put out a few different questions that you can see here, such as, what does the concept of public mean at this particular moment? I think, especially at this time right now, as we continue to deal with these issues, especially as this the trial of Derek Chauvin is going on at this moment. I think these are just issues that everyone has been thinking about, but everyone has been thinking about from their from their specific places and not always as a collective. So how could, in some ways, this kind of group reflection allow this to happen in a kind of almost digital public sphere? And so some of the responses, and actually, I would just say importantly to this, we not only did we kind of ask folks who are kind of publicly engaged designers all across the country, but also, we also asked students who have been involved in publicly engaged design projects to kind of to reflect on some of these ideas. And we included these again in kind of 3 different themes: public, engagement, and then finally design. And I think this last image that I have here, and I actually think this is the last image in the talk, I would just ask folks if anyone has if the app Artivive, you can actually look at this image as a augmented reality poster. So we're actually, these posters are being printed right now. And again, it actually has this kind of augmented reality component where folks can hold your phone over the poster and actually get all of the variety of responses that people had to the prompt. And I'm going to stop share for a second because I can also share a quick movie of this. So just hold on 1 second. I'm going to stop my share. Give me 1 more second. Pull it up now. And here we go. So if you don't have Artivive on your phone, I can just play the video here. Yeah, and that concludes my talk. Thank you so much.
Brett, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. What an expansive practice. And also great to have your visuals, the visuals of your creative process all the way along. A few questions are coming in the Q&A and implicit in the chat, as well as I know Edgar and Casey have some questions brewing too. I'll just start with one, which is maybe just sort of almost too obvious, but in a weird way, I wonder how you'd answer a pretty basic bread and butter question. That, if you're trained as a designer, whatever we think design is, think about those principles and think about, design, within the field of architecture, within the field of graphics, or within media, and add the word public and say publicly engaged design. I can implicitly understand from every one of your practices at projects why that is more public. But are there some things that you feel you have to teach students or think about with your clients when you're really trying to think about publicly engaged design? Is it like a different sets of factors, different sets of principles, thinking about designing something that, like an element that you're not used to having to design? Yeah, just maybe some bullet point thinking or brainstorming thinking about what the difference is.
I appreciate that question because I think, it's interesting because I think we've worked on several projects where actually that whole public engagement was actually something that was really wanted and kind of like from the client side, whereas other projects we might have done where maybe that public engagement wasn't something that necessarily was thought about or wanted, or and it is something that I think has that actually sometimes you have to make it a piece of the project. And
so what would be an example of if you, I don't want you to overshare, but what would be an example of you trying to flip or adjust the principles or values or parameters of the project in a way that you felt corresponded to that kind of value?
Well, I want to say, so I have loved working with the studio gang on the project at Santa Cruz, and I think we continue to get positive feedback from them about the one of the specific community engagement design um, sessions that we did with students where I think they were just like, it maybe hadn't been a part of the initial approach, but I think they felt like they learned so much from the students, from actually just a different way of kind of hearing from them and hearing their impressions and what they valued. And in some ways, I feel like we're also using these tools now at this time where I think many of us are questioning our own, like white European um, kind of schooling that we've had. I mean, my professors were professors who were trained in the kind of Basel school in Switzerland, and I think, now at this kind of moment, we're questioning. I mean, just in class this morning, we were thinking about some of the kind of historical terminology and questioning that terminology that I think is in some ways very, very dated, and that we need to kind of question that. So I think I just veered a little bit away from the question, but
that's okay. Yeah, thank you. Casey and Edgar, maybe you want to join in. Also, I'll just sort of say to the students, and especially anyone affiliated with Berkeley, I really appreciated you bringing up Artivive as a tool at the end. I just want you to know that through A+D, we do have a license with Artivive, and we at A+D have been sponsoring a range of projects, campus architecture experience, as well as funding courses that are using Artivive to create different kinds of AR experiences. And so I'm going to put in the chat a link to some of our resources around Artivive, just that people might want to know about. All right, welcome, Casey and Edgar. Edgar, maybe I'll ask you to start off with a question or comment or some kind of response that you see from your perspective to Brett's practice.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much. I feel like I have a lot of questions. One of the first things I was thinking about was, as someone who, engages in education, like what are some opportunities you see within like exhibition spaces pedagogically that you've maybe been able to kind of work with a little bit that maybe you might see can help augment or support other forms of education?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you can find overlaps between public initiatives and the classroom, I was so happy to be working actually last year with the city of Davis. I mean, they had seen some of the work we had done around fog waste in San Jose, and they reached out, and we kind of worked with them. And actually, it kind of paused a little bit during the pandemic, and hopefully we'll restart. But I think just, in some ways it maybe almost comes back to what I was saying at the beginning around like meeting people where they are. Like, I think if you can find groups or initiatives or things that like might be somewhat aligned with, studio courses, or that those are opportunities for public engagement where you can work with them over, a semester or something. And I do also think that's a challenge. I think one of the things we often talk about at the Imagining America conferences and the community engaged design sessions is like that sometimes community engaged design doesn't happen over 10 or 15 weeks. Like it could take a year or two. For example, that San Jose project, we worked with the city of San Jose and did meetings over 3 years. And I think, I mean, the design parts of the project maybe only were, a short, or I should say, like what we typically think of as design, but the community engaged design, like that's also design, and that actually has to kind of happen over a much longer period of time. So I think just thinking about how that aligns with semesters or different timelines is something that you almost need to kind of strategize around. I don't know, does that answer your question or touch on the question?
Do you have a follow-up, Edgar?
Yeah, no, that definitely does answer, I guess. And one follow-up I could think of is like, when you're working in such an expansive way, kind of engaging with community, like what are some things you think about when you're actually exhibiting some of these projects, like in kind of what you end up showing or what you don't show of the process?
I think it always depends on what I mean, that's a great question, Edgar, because you're right. I mean, sometimes it's not the whole thing. Maybe there's only a small piece that might be kind of shown at a particular time. I mean, one thing, for example, again, kind of coming back to this meeting people where they are, some of those meetings, we might only have like 5 minutes to present at a, larger community meeting. So how do you kind of pack all of the ideas into like one image, I think is often a challenge for us. So I think, we almost have to think about what is that range of situations and designing things that actually accommodate the, like, you have someone for like 10 seconds, what are you going to say? Versus, you might be doing a workshop that's, 3 hours and you can kind of get into a much more kind of in-depth conversation around something. So I think that is actually kind of as you kind of remarked, that is actually one of the pieces of the challenge.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Brett. And Casey, what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, my question is actually a little bit about how you use space as a designer. And I love this mantra of meeting people where they are and engaging with the community. But it seems like one of the strengths of a lot of these projects also has to do with the way in which, as a designer, you're sort of bringing bodies into a particular space and orienting them in a particular way to see something they wouldn't have seen before. And so I'm just thinking about design within the context of this course and this lecture series. We've been talking a lot about time and time-based art, but of course, a lot of the work we've seen also takes up space, these big installations that are sort of configured in a particular way. Last week, we had Miriam Banani, who was speaking about how she designs specific seating for her installations because she wants the bodies to sort of sit and linger and feel welcome in the space. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you maybe encourage bodies to look a certain way or move a certain way within a space.
Yeah, I'm just thinking kind of as you're saying that about a range of kinds of projects that think about that in some ways, in different ways. That one of the projects I just had a quick image of it at the beginning, the Freedom Toolkit, which actually integrated, as the one you were saying, kind of seating into it so that it could get people around a table to have more of like a one-on-one conversation. And I think, just actually, I think you said it really eloquently, almost that thinking about what outcomes you might want and what kinds of conversations might allow that, whether it's a kind of group conversation where only one person might speak versus like where you might want something more intimate, where it's just a couple of people. And, is there a way of recording that? I think often we do find ourselves like designing what that thing is that people record on. And actually that's something someone I'm often inspired, Candy Cheng is a designer, I think, who really works in that realm and tries to get, think about different input different ways of kind of, recording information from people that can be really meaningful, that we can actually think of as data. And I think that's the, I think people often critique publicly engaged design as, it's just that like Post-it note stuff, right? And I think if we kind of take it beyond the kind of Post-it note and think in a more sophisticated way, actually, as you're saying, Casey, around like, how do we kind of think strategically or in a kind of bigger way around like what kinds of groups or conversations or sizes of conversations might elicit the kind of rich information that would actually be like incredibly rich data. And I think that was with the public sentiment project is the one that we've probably done the most public engagement meetings. It was in the high double digits, and just so many different kinds of conversations, whether it was with like youth groups or senior citizens, that you're actually getting very different kinds of information, like with the a child who might kind of be near the creek that's thinking about it from a very like material, tactile, versus someone at the senior home. Those stories just stick with me around hearing like, 50 years ago you could fish here and this is what it was like, and actually, it was when you could fish there, it, as a creek, was much more environmentally productive because it was actually, not only could fish swim up the creek, but the creek was delivering sediment and actually providing this kind of buffer to climate change. So I think it's these these kinds of ranges of stories and from different from different kinds of people.
Thanks. Yeah, I love the idea of a table that you mentioned. It's, a metaphor, but also sort of a literal way of bringing people sort of together to contribute. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It really does, resonate a lot with, on Tuesday, we had, the pleasure of specifically thinking about exhibition design for media art installation. And now we can sort of see that puzzle inside of a wider project about what it means to organize space. We have questions within the Q&A that range very widely, some really asking some specific questions about the projects you showed. So I'm going to start taking them in order, and Edgar and Casey, you can help out as well. From Sky, right away with that first project you showed around the mural, she's wondering what the intended reaction was for the mural. Was it meant to invoke unknown responses? I'm assuming that too, but how you think about response or receivership, and whether you have, hoped for responses and how you welcome unanticipated ones.
Yeah, I mean, with the mural, I will say that, I approached that project just with the hope of doing a mural, and it really just kind of stemmed from wanting to, I don't know if anyone in this group has been to Syracuse. It's actually an incredibly beautiful city, although I think often folks don't refer to it that way. And it, these kind of beautiful old industrial buildings. And I just, I wanted to kind of somehow be connected to that. And I also think, it's just a city that has this kind of past grandeur as well. And I think the desire with the impression was that not everyone has a smartphone, and I know that. So I wanted it to just be a beautiful mural without a smartphone. And so I think for me that was the challenge, was how do you design something that for any just passerby, it is a kind of has a kind of aesthetic quality as a mural, but it would have this kind of added function that if people did want to kind of engage and learn more, that it would also have that kind of ability to kind of see and discover pieces of the city. And I again, I did this it was about a decade ago, and I still get responses and people contacting me through it. And yeah, it's I will say that I did a lot of research on even just the paint types that we use, so that they would be paints that lasted. So the last I heard, the paint is still strong. So yeah.
Edgar and Casey, do you want to, I can keep going through all these questions. Actually, maybe let's do some fun things just to get more voices in the room. Maybe Christopher and Annika, could we unmute? Would you be willing to unmute and ask your questions aloud? So Brett has a sense of you being there. Maybe, thanks, Christopher.
Yeah,
can
hi.
you go first? Hi.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Brett's actually yesterday in the breakout room. So actually, it's really good to ask it again. So my question is about the fog waste project that you had. I guess since I'm in a business class of sustainability, I was kind of seeing it towards the sustainable side. So I guess my question is, would you consider that fog waste to be a sustainable project? And if so, do you prefer to work in sustainable projects, or do you have any more sustainable projects that you would look forward in the future?
Yeah, what for me, great question. First of all, Christopher, thank you. And it was a pleasure to hear some of your thoughts in the group the other day. So definitely, I really like to take on projects that feel like they have a strong sustainability quality. I also just want to credit the city of San Jose. It was amazing to us that they would seek out artists to approach the idea of sustainability instead of kind kind of going in, to an engineer. And in some ways, similar to the Alameda Creek project, where in some ways it was kind of engineering that kind of got into the current mess of the creek actually not kind of performing its environmental functions. And I think, as artists and designers, we can think about, in what ways, people want to be sustainable. I mean, I suspect if we did a poll right now, and who here wants to do things that are more sustainable, I suspect every hand would be raised. And so I think people also, though, I think don't understand their connection between their home and where their water goes, and what can you put down the drain and what can't you. And so I think people really wanted to and were really super receptive to the project. So I think as artists and designers, can we think about ways that involve people that do kind of use our kind of expertise as artists and designers and help people do actually what they already want to do. So in that sense, I definitely see it as a kind of sustainable kind of project and initiative, and would continue to seek out those kinds of projects. I mean, in some ways, some of these projects, I mean, these represent a kind of, I tried to put together a collection of projects that really showed this engaged design component. And I would say that we continue to kind of really seek out those kinds of projects.
Annika, thanks for joining. Can you ask your question?
Sure, yeah. So I come from kind of an engineering background, and in product design, we learned a lot about the principles of universal design, which is making sure that products or buildings are accessible to anyone, regardless of their age or disability or other factors. So I was wondering if accessibility is something that you take into account in any of your work, or designing a gallery space.
Yeah, I would say more and more. In fact, I worked with students on an installation with the artist Andrea Bowers earlier in the year. And I would actually say that the way we approached that project was actually thinking about accessibility from the beginning. And I mean, it's a different way of approaching a project. And I think more and more, I think it's something that's important. I would say that, if I kind of look back over, the projects I've done, not every project was started with that kind of lens of accessibility. But I do think it's incredibly important. Actually, one of the things I learned recently was just how central Berkeley has really been to thinking about accessibility, and, the kind of first credited curb cut, and that kind of whole movement associated with that. And so, in that way, I think in the ways that we're actually historically connected to this movement, I think, what are ways that we can actually build on that and kind of bring that to an even greater level.
Yeah. Being at the site of the founding of the independent living movement, is a legacy we have to always take seriously. Okay, I'm gonna ask a couple of questions at once, just because there's so much coming in. And let me take up Ella Babarta's question first. Where she's asking, since you talked about that you take up stories from, Ella, are you there? Your question just went away.
It's in the answered section, sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There we go. Okay. That something that specifically she wants to hear about when you were engaging with community. Can you give an example, just where you heard something really specific from somebody that stuck with you and it might have changed the direction of your work? Just to, I think kind of to demystify this community engaged practice just a bit, so we could feel it on the ground.
Yeah, one concrete one that's just coming to mind as you say that is, I think, with the project at Kresge College with Studio Gang, one of the things that we heard at the student engagement event was just like how folks associated with this kind of stucco building with the site and these kind of historical stucco buildings. And I think it actually gave some insights to the architects around just how people kind of understood and felt and had this kind of emotional connection. And I think with, I can think of one of those almost with each of these projects where, there was a story, I mean, with, the one about the red frog at Alameda Creek, like each of these allowed us to think about something that was like really important to people. And then how do you, then of course you're designing with that in mind. And I think that's the important piece of this is like finding novel ways to get to some of these stories that you might not have been a kind of, underpinning or foundational to a project. And I think the more we can, get kind of sophisticated responses, the more those can actually become almost like integral to like some kind of a design process.
I'm going to ask a follow-up that is also a little later in the Q&A that I think relates from Frankly, about this question about how to get people to work on a common goal if you're working in community engagement, and how you self-affirm your leadership, or do you when things are not going to plan. Again, I know I don't want you to overshare, but if there is like a story where kind of things were tough, things, where things, changed.
I could definitely think of,
yeah.
I mean, actually, I will say when we were working on the fog waste project, there was a moment where I think it was like, I was somewhere early on in the project where, I don't know, someone, I think just like made some kind of a blog post or something where, they were like, how can, why are we kind of wasting money on artists to be involved in this problem? And, I mean, I can imagine it from that, and I can imagine a whole lot of people having that perspective on it. And I would just argue actually that, and I don't think I ever publicly argued, but, I mean, if you just think about actually, if you were to re-engineer, that would be $1 billion project. But if you, kind of get into people's hearts and kind of, think about just our everyday practices, if we've slight changes, and it costs almost nothing. I mean, if you think about what, as artists and designers fees, they're negligible compared to some of those fees. So
that's one way to get buy-in. You're cheap.
Exactly.
Casey and Edgar, why don't you field a couple of questions for us?
Yeah, I can start with one from Michelle about history and place. So Michelle asks, with the current renaming of places and new attention to considering the history of place, how could wayfinding be used as an embedded tool for educating people about the history of place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just so important. I mean, I'd say that, I mean, I think Shannon can kind of speak to this too, that something that we've been thinking about with the UC placemaking initiative acknowledges all of that. And I think I will say that there's challenges there. So actually one example I would just give is that, we, with the Resilient by Design challenge, where that was essentially a year-long challenge, we reached out to Indigenous groups on that particular project, and they didn't want to be involved. And I think understandably, what are they necessarily going to kind of get out of it? And I think it was, I mean, obviously it was a kind of bummer from our standpoint, because I think, we want to be able to give, I think, or hear those voices. And I think, it's in some ways almost that challenge of, timelines, that for them knowing that this is a year-long thing, why is that going to be, kind of worth their time, when it's not something that, let's say, is getting like much larger investment over a much longer period of time. And so I think we just need to advocate for that as much as we can, and find ways that we can make it kind of worth their while.
It does occur to me, like when you're thinking about, using Artivive, or thinking about the specific thing of wayfinding, or I think about the project that you did, Phantom City, in New York, that part of what might, one response to Michelle's question is also to start to use some of these tools to surface a history of place that is not currently visible in the moment that you're encountering that place, right? And so when you're wayfinding, you're not necessarily finding your way through what are now official, perhaps invisibilizing experiences of, say, the Bay Area space, but instead you might have alternative walks, alternative encounters that these tools could, sort of vivify and reveal something that, is, embedded and repressed at the moment.
Yeah, actually, one book I would just maybe give a plug for, I don't know if folks have seen it, is a People's Guide to the San Francisco Bay Area, that actually really does try to look at the Bay Area from a really multiple perspectives. And I will say, actually, we're in the studio I'm teaching right now, we're kind of using that book almost as a kind of lens to thinking about wayfinding in a more kind of complex way that it does look to these different histories.
Great.
Yeah, and I think kind of connected to this, I wanted to ask Kelly Tan's question here in the Q&A, where she's, following up on some of the questions I asked earlier. How would you go about finding some art-related groups or some initiatives? How do you suggest people getting involved with these types of community groups, especially now when things are virtual?
I mean, I think the place to start is, just to find the groups that you feel that you might be aligned with. I mean, I think I remember, actually, I arrived in the Bay Area from New York about almost a decade ago, and I remember I think I just like cold called, I can't remember, it was like maybe the sustainability director in Oakland, and of course I never got a call back or anything. But you just keep trying and finding those people, and I feel like for me it was finding people that were kind of eager to collaborate. And I found this woman, Claire Napawan, in the landscape architecture program at UC Davis, and where I was one, then we were two, and I think the two of us then were able to kind of go out and find these kind of more public projects. And I think I look to kind of some of the students right now at UC Davis. There's a group called Pixel. Like I see them like operating more like a collective, and they, as those collectives, they are something bigger than one person. And I think the more you can kind of find those groups that do have the kinds of ambitions and goals and things that you can kind of align yourself with, that you can then you have more power, and you can find the groups that want to then be involved, and then you can take projects a lot farther.
Great, thank you very much for that. I also wanted on the previous theme too about when things maybe go awry, or when there is when values aren't aligned. There's a question from Antonia in the chat about how you align the commercial reality of operating a practice with a protracted community engagement that might span over years. So just the different sensibilities of what it is to be running a business in property development and in the commercial space, next to also community values, but also the long-term nature of a community engagement practice.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably better people to ask that question. That I feel like I have not yet personally answered that question perfectly.
So you haven't had property managers or corporate or other types of stakeholders in a project, or been told that your client needs to reconcile different views or values?
I have not. I feel like I haven't had that particular challenge yet, but I don't know. I mean,
Say
but I think that
well, what are the artists doing? Why are we doing the artists? Why do the artists here, into our space? But I suppose was one of those examples. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I mean, actually thinking about maybe I'm speaking too quickly that I have, because I think I have, and I think we do, and I'm just actually thinking about now, the project we did recently with an artist through the Shrem, where I think just thinking again of just this thing where like timelines don't necessarily align, and I think especially during this time of the pandemic where things like you expect that something's going to happen 1 month, but it doesn't necessarily align with things that need to happen at this moment. So I think we just need to be nimble and flexible. And I mean, I will say, actually, the piece of the question that we're not like a big firm. We're really, I think, in that sense, kind of small and nimble. And I will say, actually, I just want to highlight so many kind of students who were maybe my student over a year or two, and then maybe we worked on projects, and then a lot of recent students have worked kind of part-time after graduating and been, I think, a really important piece on many of these projects. And I think that's been just really great to be able to kind of work with students over the years.
Wonderful. Edgar, do you want to close us out with a couple questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you had any recommendations for artists who are designing exhibitions for a physical space if they're not able to see it physically. I know that you work with virtual kind of platforms, and also wondering if there's anything that helps kind of guide you, like a guiding principle when it comes to designing exhibitions.
Wait, your Wi-Fi was bad for 1 second when you were saying that. Say the last sentence.
Yeah. If you have a guiding principle or principles when you design exhibitions.
Oh, yeah. I think I would say that one guiding principle is just that the message is clear. I think if there's kind of one thing, I know I didn't present today the project we did in Philadelphia. There was kind of a conversation between photographs in two different cities. But I think, trying to just have a clear message is I would say, if there's like one guiding principle, that's pretty much it. So that it can be productive in that manner. Whether it's actually an exhibition, an installation, a community engaged design workshop, that somehow the kind of message is clear, so that people know what they're getting into, and that that there's kind of a productive response, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I will say that I do like to, actually, maybe almost an unexpected answer to this is, I would say that we don't shy away from things that are like novel, because I think people like to engage with novel things. I mean, that is why, the QR codes with the Salt City mural, just wanting, people see it and they're curious. So I think maybe that's one other thing is just on the one hand, clarity, on the other, kind of curiosity, and kind of just sparking people's interest. I think that was certainly, and I guess that's the balance, is between.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And do you have any thoughts around when you're designing something on your computer for a physical space, if there's anything that's helped you kind of with that translation, or with kind of thinking about space in a virtual way?
I will say one thing for me, I think a lot I mean, we use so many different programs. I mean, for the 3D stuff, I would say that I'm a big proponent of Rhino. It's just a 3D modeling program. But I will say that I'm not someone who necessarily approaches things where I need to or want to make a kind of realistic rendering of something. I mean, in that sense, I think, hand sketching and just doing, a range of those kinds of ways of envisioning can be really helpful. So I think, I mean, in my practice, we go through so many different kinds of media, and I think actually like embracing all of those and just using them, you know, like sometimes we make movies, and I think the movies can actually talk about projects in a whole other way.
Yeah, well, Brett, it really has been, in terms of getting this like tour of all of your different projects, it's really has been striking to see how many different forms of media, how many different tools, how many different, you could sort of say, types of artistic tools you use. It really also chimes with something Thea is saying earlier about expanding even what we think art is, but also the way that you expand, you know, what it seems like the practice of design is. And it really is, I think, in the spirit of this wider course this wider course that we teach every semester is on thinking through the arts and design at Berkeley with, you know, exposure to a range of forms. Even in the midst of focusing on time-based media art, we really are trying to give you know, sort of a wide sense of what the toolkit is. And today you really have given us such a sense of a wide toolkit, as well as one that is publicly engaged and chimes with the values at UC Berkeley and the values of our community. So I really want to thank you for your generosity, your insight, your time, and for sharing space with us today. It has really been a pleasure, and we look forward to more collaboration across the UC, as we always say at the end of every one of these Zoom events, in person. But for now, so happy to have you online. Thank you
so much.
Thank you so
Thanks
much for
also
today.
For all the really great questions. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, they're a great group, aren't they? Yeah, thanks to
Absolutely.
Students and community for all your engagement. All right, thank you. Until next Thursday. Okay, see you later.
Bye, everyone.